The silence of the midnight hour in South America wasn't broken by a storm, but by a tremor that started at the gates of Fortuna and ended with a desk slam heard across the entire world. 1 minute ago, the geopolitical map of the Western Hemisphere was rewritten in blood and fire. As we speak, the city of Caracas is a landscape of sirens and smoke, reeling from a large-scale U.S. military strike that caught the world and the Maduro regime completely off guard. The news broke not through a formal press briefing but via a shockwave on social media at 4:21 a.m. President Donald Trump, in a post that instantly shattered the digital sphere, claimed the unthinkable. U.S. forces have successfully captured Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. According to the commander-in-chief, the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution has already been flown out of the country. The chaos we are witnessing isn't just a news story. It is the physical manifestation of a months-long pressure campaign, finally boiling over into kinetic warfare. For hours, low-flying aircraft swept through the capital and at least 7 massive explosions rocked civilian and military installations. This is the most significant U.S. military intervention in Latin America since 1989, and it marks the beginning of a conflict that no expert predicted would happen this soon. But as the smoke clears over the Caribbean, the real question isn't just if it happened, but how the U.S. managed to snatch the most protected man in the region under the cover of darkness. The answer lies in a plan so secret even Congress was left in the dark, and what happens next will leave you in disbelief. The seeds of today's war were planted in August 2025 when the United States began what it called Operation Southern Spear. At the time, the administration claimed the massive surge of warships and military assets to the Caribbean was purely for counter-narcotics operations. But while the world was distracted by domestic policy, the USS Gerald R. Ford and a fleet of stealth destroyers were quietly positioning themselves for a strike that would decapitate a government. The justification for this escalation was built on a narco-terrorist framing. For months, the White House labeled the Venezuelan government a terrorist organization, a move that analysts now see as a strategic pretext for bypassing the U.S. Congress and taking unilateral action. The administration didn't just want Maduro out, they wanted to dismantle the cartel of the Suns once and for all. This wasn't just a military buildup, it was the construction of a constitutional loophole. By linking Maduro to drug cartels and global gangs, the administration paved a road for Delta Force to walk right into Caracas under the flag of law enforcement. But as the fleet closed in, the Venezuelan leadership remained defiant, convinced that the U.S. would never actually cross the line into a full-scale ground invasion. They were wrong. The stakes had been raised, the pieces were in place, and the sports arena governance of the White House was about to be replaced by the cold, hard reality of specialized warfare. The clock struck 2 a.m. in Caracas when the sky turned into a nightmare of fire and steel. While the city slept, Joint Special Operations Command, led by the elite operators of Delta Force, executed a raid that will be studied in military academies for decades. The primary targets were the heart of the regime, La Carlota Military Airport and Fortuna, the principal military complex where Maduro felt safest. As 7 massive explosions ripped through communication antennas and military bases, low-flying aircraft swept low enough to shatter windows across the capital. Eyewitnesses reported a column of smoke rising from the airport. But the real action was happening in the shadows. In a lightning-fast strike, Delta Force teams reportedly breached the presidential quarters, capturing both Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores before the Venezuelan Guard could even mount a defense. The operation was described as large-scale, but its precision was surgical. Most of the strikes were launched as specific antennas and active military bases, effectively blinding the Venezuelan command and control. While Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was frantically demanding proof of life, Maduro was already thousands of feet in the air, heading toward U.S. custody to face narco-terrorism charges. The villain who had defied multiple U.S. administrations was gone in a heartbeat. But the aftermath was just beginning. Power was cut to southern Caracas, commercial flights were banned by the FAA, and a state of external disturbance was declared across the nation. The world held its breath as the first images of burnt-out vehicles at the airbase began to circulate, proving that the invincible fortress of the Bolivarian Revolution had crumbled in just 60 minutes. How did we get here? How did a once wealthy nation become a moral slum that requires a military raid to resolve its destiny? To understand the fall of Nicolás Maduro, we have to look at the wreckage he leaves behind. This is a man who turned the Bolivarian dream into a nightmare of hyperinflation, starvation, and systemic corruption. For years, Maduro stayed in power by purging his opponents and turning his military into an informal network of corrupt officials. He ignored the cries of his people even as they fled by the millions to escape the wrongful detention and torture that became the hallmark of his regime. He dismissed the world's demands for a peaceful transition, instead choosing to hide behind a $50 million U.S. bounty and the support of adversarial powers. The villain of this story isn't just Maduro. It's the arrogance of a dictator who thought he could outlast the law. He watched the U.S. military build up for months, and even as the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier loomed in the Caribbean, he remained mum, convinced that he could bargain his way out of justice. But today that gamble failed. The man who once used energy resources as a weapon of desperate greed now finds himself at the mercy of the very legal system he spent his life mocking. His downfall wasn't a tragedy, it was the inevitable conclusion of a legacy built on the suffering of others. In this landscape of chaos, the hero of the story isn't just a person, it is the unwavering principle of American resolve. Under the direction of President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the U.S. has sent a message that transcends this single conflict. The era of the untouchable is over. The strategic brilliance of the Joint Special Operations Command allowed for a decapitation strike that avoided the endless war scenario so many feared. By focusing on narcoterrorism as the legal bridge, the U.S. positioned itself as a global law enforcement agency acting on a 2020 indictment that had sat on the shelf for too long. This was a centrist whisperer's dream of military precision, a strike so fast and so deep that it left the enemy paralyzed before they could even declare a state of emergency. American resolve proved that the UN Charter shouldn't be a shield for state terrorism against the Venezuelan people. While critics will call this imperialist aggression, those who have suffered under Maduro's thumb see it as a homecoming of justice. The U.S. isn't just seizing control of oil. It is seizing back the narrative of freedom in the Western Hemisphere. The protagonist here is the belief that the American dream isn't just for Americans, but a commitment to fairness and dignity that must be defended wherever it is brutally assaulted. The world didn't just react, it fractured. Within minutes of the explosions, the international community was forced into a frantic realignment. Colombian President Gustavo Petro immediately alerted the world that war had begun, calling for an urgent meeting of the UN and the OAS. In Cuba, President Miguel Díaz-Canel issued a sharply worded condemnation, accusing Washington of state terrorism and criminal attack. From Moscow to Tehran, the condemnation was swift, with the Iranian Foreign Ministry calling the strike a flagrant violation of national sovereignty. But while the revolutionary world shouted, the European Union and leaders like Italy's Giorgia Meloni took a more measured tone, calling for restraint and monitoring the situation closely to protect their own citizens in the region. In the streets of Caracas, the reaction was a mixture of terror and paralyzed hope. Pedestrians were filmed running for cover as U.S. aircraft swept low through the skyline. The Venezuelan government urged its citizens to rise up and mobilize to defeat the imperialist aggression. But without their leader, the call seemed to echo in a vacuum. The global shockwave has left the world holding its breath, waiting for the press conference at Mar-a-Lago that will define the new order of the Caribbean. But while the front lines were in Caracas, the real political war was unfolding back in Washington. 1 minute ago, the invincibility of the executive branch met the wall of law. Senator Mike Lee, a staunch defender of constitutional originalism, took to social media to voice his concern, asking what could possibly constitutionally justify this action without a formal declaration of war. This is the shock files moment of the story. Even as the strikes were being called a success, key members of Congress were reporting that they were never officially notified. Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego was even blunter, calling the war illegal and a violation of the War Powers Resolution. The White House is framing this as a law enforcement operation, but the legislative branch is seeing it as a massive overreach. The Armed Services Committees in both the House and Senate are already planning oversight investigations. This isn't just a war against Maduro, it's a test of the American presidency. Is the commander-in-chief allowed to launch large-scale strikes on a sovereign nation based solely on drug trafficking indictments? The constitutional clash between the executive locomotive and the legislative anchor is about to become the biggest court battle in U.S. history. Through the smoke of battle and the fog of political rhetoric, a deeper truth is beginning to emerge. This isn't about the towers of Caracas or the oil beneath the ground. It's about the survival of the American soul. For every person who has lived under the wrongful detention of a dictator, today is a homecoming of dignity. We are reminded that in this hemisphere, the law must be the only king. We bow to the principle that no one is above accountability, not even a man who claimed to be a revolutionary. By removing Maduro, the U.S. has restored the idea that truth is more powerful than any narco-terrorist network. The American dream has always been about the freedom to choose your own destiny, and today, that choice has been returned to the people of Venezuela. The hero of the mind, the idea of justice, has finally defeated the villain of arrogance. Buildings can be seized and headlines can be written, but the principle of liberty is what we truly reclaim today. This isn't just a military victory, it's a vindication of the values that define us all. History is being written in real time, and you are a witness to the most dramatic shift in American foreign policy in nearly 40 years. The chaos in Caracas is finally giving way to a new reality, one where the untouchable can be reached and the law can be enforced across any border. But this story is far from over. As we wait for the 11 a.m. press conference at Mar-a-Lago, the world remains on the edge of its seat. What will happen to the Maduro regime's remaining forces? How will the U.S. navigate the constitutional firestorm in D.C.? We will be here to bring you every update, every breakdown, and every shock file detail as it happens. If you believe that the law should be the only king and that truth should always have the final word, then join us on this journey. Hit that subscribe button right now to stay updated on the USA Prime News Network. Share this video to let the world know that the era of accountability has arrived. Stand with the truth. Stand with the justice. Stand with us.